Nothing justifies genocide.
Imagine that.
Yeah,
Nothing.
yes. That's one of those things when, they're doing a genocide, so they're wrong. That's all you need to think about that. Hamas is saying this. Hamas says 500 dead in Israeli strike on hospital. And if you had that as the headline, you might draw reasonable conclusions like, they're lying.
They're a terrorist organization. Yeah, I think it is a pop culture moment insofar as we see the left's reaction in America.
It's because they've been lied to and led along and told by people like BLM that anytime there's an oppressed group and a group that's allegedly oppressing them, the oppressed group is always, without fail, in the right. The Jews are fighting to protect innocence, and Hamas is using innocence to protect themselves. Hello, welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Sterling and Andrew.
Hey guys.
Today we're doing a little bit of a divergence from what we normally do, so this is our disclaimer that this is going to be a slightly different episode. Today our topic is excusing terror. Ignore the facts, blame the Jews.
Yeah.
What we're talking about clearly is Israel and the horrible 10/7 attacks that Hamas launched on a day of celebration and holiday in Israel.
Mm-hmm. Massacring families in their own homes.
In entire villages, with the goal of killing as many Jews as they possibly could.
Yes.
So this is a little bit different in that it's a news story that's currently actively in the news, and it's kind of more political than we normally do, but this is a pop culture moment, and it is something that people who are only tuned into pop culture are seeing and need to be paying attention to, and so we're going to expound on that some.
Yeah, I think it is a pop culture moment insofar as we see the left's reaction in America. And to kind of distill it, and then we can dive into this a little bit more, I think the origins of the reaction are based in the mainstream media and also in higher education.
For sure.
And I would argue that the mainstream media especially is an artifact of pop culture.
Yeah.
And I would also argue that higher education is as well. And
I would actually argue, sorry to interrupt, that the mainstream media is more an artifact of higher education than it is of pop culture. But they're all intertangled for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, MSM is a benefactor of higher education and those that it produces. The reason that we're making that distinction, especially because this is a pop culture podcast, is because, pop culture is defined roughly as artifacts of a culture.
Yeah, it's what people are talking about popularly, basically. Yeah. That's how I define it.
Well, and often that can be anything from like movies or TV, or it could be things like sports, or even things like advertising, Coca-Cola.
And every once in a while, it's geopolitical events. Yeah. I mean, when the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, we saw everyone's Facebook picture turn into the Ukraine flag, right?
That's right.
And that's pop culture when it's on social media.
Well, and the reason why it's important to us in this context, too, is because we believe that politics follows culture. Yeah. Like, politics is downstream from culture.
Right.
And pop culture is a reflection of culture.
Right. And unfortunately, we kind of feel that we're playing catch up on that realization, because it seems like, I'll just limit it to say the Marxists a century ago caught on to that, and it took the conservative right a lot longer to figure it out.
Yeah. And that's especially been a movement that's taken great hold since the 60s and 70s, particularly in higher education. Higher education being dominated by the left from the 70s on, and then ultimately the mainstream media, which kind of, as the New York Times likes to say, sets the agenda for the nation.
Right.
And their arrogance.
Right. So, someone might try to dispute that these Marxists have taken over higher education, but we have proof. We have proof with this current event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So one of the big news stories here in America was that 30 Harvard student groups signed a letter on the day of 10/7, on the day of these terror attacks, when they were still trying to push Hamas out of Israel's borders. They didn't even know exactly what had happened yet. On that day, 30 Harvard student groups signed a letter saying they completely blame Israel for everything that's happening and that they stand with Palestine, which is the same, whether they know it or not, as saying they stand with Hamas.
Mm-hmm. And why do we think that is?
Right. It's because they've been lied to and led along and told by people like BLM that anytime there's an oppressed group and a group that's allegedly oppressing them, the oppressed group is always, without fail, in the right.
And that is really a key tenet of Marxism,
Yeah.
which, as we have explained and will explain, is fully infiltrated our higher education. So it's really no wonder that that would be a default. Although other things could be argued, there are two sides of every coin.
Yeah.
This is literally an issue of a nation of people, essentially multiple nations of people, wanting to eradicate a race because they don't want them to exist. I hate that I have to predicate this, but because of the narratives that are going out there, this is obviously the Muslim world wants to destroy the Jews.
Right. The Muslim world wants to destroy Israel specifically, and then probably Jews everywhere, and then the West in general, I think. But when you say that these nations want to do that, it's important to say the nations that want to destroy Israel are Syria and Lebanon and Jordan and Iran. They're not Palestine, because Palestine is not and never has been a nation. They were offered a nation. They rejected it.
Yeah, good distinction there.
So when you have all these people kind of saying that it's two sides and it's complicated, it is frustrating. And we'll dig more into this in a minute, but I've seen it summed up best, I think, in a cartoon where you see an Israeli fighter and a Hamas fighter, and the Israeli fighter has a bassinet with a child in it behind him, and the Hamas fighter has a bassinet with a child in it in front of him, between him and the Israeli fighter. So that's the difference. The Jews are fighting to protect innocence, and Hamas is using innocence to protect themselves. Let's dig in on why this is pop culture, because you have all these parts of pop culture where you have people hearing all this stuff day in and day out. That's just lies.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want to say that the people who are lied to about this go into the situation wanting to be lied to. If you truly are deceived, I think you kind of brought that on yourself.
Now, are you talking mainly about protesters like in America and students or the left?
I'm talking about that. I'm also talking about someone who's just casually reading New York Times headlines.
Yeah.
And I'm calling New York Times out because yesterday, today is Thursday the 19th, yesterday there was this big kerfuffle, and I guess it started 2 days ago. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
There was a alleged attack or strike on a hospital.
Yes.
And immediately after this explosion, Palestinian health authorities were claiming 500 dead, which was 10 minutes after the explosion. You couldn't have actually ascertained the number of casualties in that time. It was impossible. But it's also important to say, while the New York Times says Palestinian authorities say this, we talked to the Palestinian Health Authority or whatever, that's Hamas. There is no governing group in Palestine, in Gaza, that's not Hamas.
Yeah, they've taken over. It's been a number of years.
Yes, 17 years they've been in power.
Yeah, and even if the people there are not sympathizers, I mean, there are sympathizers and there are not sympathizers,
right?
But ultimately, they've allowed control.
Well, it does seem to me that Hamas is wildly popular within Palestine. There's videos from the day of the attacks of these people coming back with dead bodies in the backs of trucks and crowds of people gathering around cheering and celebrating the death of Jews.
Yeah. That is terrifying.
But if you just listen to American media, the mainstream media, New York Times, Washington Post, Reuters even, you wouldn't realize that there's not some Gazan government and then Hamas. You would think those are two separate things when they're in fact the exact same group.
Right. And therein lies the issue with the mainstream media and taking radical agendas as the truth.
Yeah.
And then spouting them as lies for, I would argue, even one further, America's entertainment.
Well, and that is slimy part of this. And I kind of felt it too with my own job, where something in general, if something terrible happens that's newsworthy, if you're involved in the news, you're kind of like, oh, well, that means my job's going to be, I don't know, easier, more interesting for the next little while. And so you have this perverse incentive to blow up to expand and expound on these horrible events by the American news media. And the 24-hour news cycle has helped that a lot as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's telling that straight out the gate, the MSM was willing to believe a known terrorist organization.
Right. And I'll just read a couple of the headlines that they put out.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
So CNN's headline was, "Hundreds killed in Israeli strike on Gaza hospital, comma, Palestinian officials say."
Mm-hmm.
Wall Street Journal even, "Israeli airstrike on Gaza hospital kills more than 500, Palestinian officials say." AP, Hamas says Israeli airstrike on Gaza hospital killed hundreds, and more. There's just so many of these where the AP actually did put the important part at the beginning, which is that you're hearing this from Hamas.
Yeah.
Hamas is saying this. Hamas says 500 dead in Israeli strike on hospital. And if you had that as the headline, you might draw reasonable conclusions like, oh, they're lying.
They're a terrorist organization.
Right.
That's running a country. And so you're literally going to take the word of a terrorist organization out the gate, as opposed to an organization which is, I would say Israel is really a Western country.
They are, in pretty much every respect.
They're ultimately more sophisticated than most any other
They're the most sophisticated of their neighbors by orders of magnitude.
Yes, and although it is claimed that they are terrible about killing civilians and stuff, I would say they are one of the best militaries in the world for mitigating civilian impact, generally speaking.
I think that's got to be true because they get put under this microscope that other nations don't.
Right.
But just in case you're saying, oh, this is just Israeli propaganda, there's quotes from leaders of Hamas living in Qatar, because that's where the leaders of Hamas live. They live in a safe country where they can have palaces, and then they steal the money from their freedom fighters, and then they hope that more Gazan civilians get killed, because these are literally evil people. But anyhow, there's a recent news interview from one of the leaders of Hamas on Al Jazeera saying, "We love death like the Israelis love life." Mm-hmm. So this is not confusing. There's no good reason to be confused here. There's people who literally celebrate death of themselves and more of the Jews, and then there's people who will send text messages to buildings saying, "Hey, we're going to strike this building in 30 minutes. You have 30 minutes to get out. Get out of the building so we don't kill innocent civilians because we just want to kill militants." That's the difference here. One group goes door to door, luring people out of their homes, kidnapping Holocaust survivors, and the other group sends a text message that alerts the civilians and probably the militants as well that they're about to get struck so they can get out. Yeah.
But again, who does the mainstream media default to in this? And it's just incredible to me. I just don't have any words.
It is unspeakable, the damage being done by the left media, and it is the left media. So just one kind of final point on why this is about pop culture. I was thinking about it via analogy to World War II, which I know that's kind of the easy analogy to make. But, we are, and I guess you can kind of always say this, we are closer to World War III now than ever before.
I would say undoubtedly.
Except for maybe the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably worse than that.
It probably is. With just, there's Armenia-Azerbaijan war going on right now. There's Ukraine-Russia, and now Israel-Hamas.
Mm-hmm. Bunch of African conflicts, too, and then the extreme threat to Taiwan. Yeah.
And then, of course, North Korea is always being nuts and threatening to nuke people, but they're North Korea.
Right.
Anyhow, the analogy is if you ran a radio show like this one in 1938 when Germany annexed Austria, and you didn't talk about it, and you were a pop culture radio program, you'd be missing the big cultural moment of that year if you didn't talk about it. So that's why we're talking about this, because we think it's that same kind of scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So that's, I think, covered pretty well some of the details here, but also why this is a pop culture moment. Andrew, can you just kind of explain some of the bad takes on this issue that are circulating right now?
I think Black Lives Matter.
Oh, yeah. So what did they tweet?
Let's see. I don't remember the exact tweet. Maybe we could pull it up.
Yeah.
But they have essentially taken the position of the oppressor versus the oppressed.
But you saw the image they tweeted, right?
Oh yes, they tweeted out an image of like solidarity with Palestine, and it was a picture of one of the paragliders, wasn't it?
Yes. On the attack on 10/7, a week and a half ago, the Hamas militants paraglided into Israel, into a music festival, and then started killing these 20-something, mostly young women who were just there to celebrate a music festival.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no association between paragliders and Gaza whatsoever, except in their use as terror
Hamas.
weapons.
Terror.
So BLM, like the day after, and I'll see if I can pull up the exact tweet, tweeted out an image of a Palestinian basically coming to kill and rape women in Israel.
Yeah.
And they said, we stand with these people, these ones who kill and rape people. That's who we're on the side of.
And I guess they're taking the position of the moral equivalency.
Yeah.
Like, we can justify our behavior. We can justify bad or even horrifying behavior if something else has happened to us. And I would argue that there is obviously some behavior that is never, ever justified under any circumstances.
Yes.
And it is never justified under any circumstance, no matter how hard you've had it, to go into people's homes and kill families.
And babies. More than 40 babies were found killed after these attacks.
Yeah.
Some of them beheaded.
Yeah. At least that's what the mainstream media says.
Well, right. There was some kerfuffle over the use of the term of 40 beheaded babies found, because apparently not every one of the babies had been beheaded. They were all dead, though.
Yeah.
The other kind of common view I see here, besides the BLM one, which is just Palestine's oppressed, so we stand with them, and whatever they do, it's justified because they're oppressed. And that is actually BLM's view here.
And Marxist ideology.
And they did tweet after that image. They said, if you're shocked that we tweeted this, you haven't been paying attention to what we're saying. I'm paraphrasing them. But they basically said, yeah, of course this is what we believe in. We've been telling you that.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. What have they been doing? I mean, they're the same people that say it's okay for you to go and pillage and steal because bad things have happened to you and your ancestors.
Right. Of course, we saw that. George Floyd died, and so the correct response is to pillage a target. Mm-hmm. I don't know why, but that is the correct response, and we cannot doubt that. Yeah. Because BLM said so.
So, yeah. In case there was any question about the organization Black Lives Matter, they don't care about Black lives.
No.
Because if they did, then they would care about actual justice and actual moral society.
Yeah. So that's the really extreme, like, you are actively rooting for the enemies of what is good and right if you hold that position. But then there's a less extreme but also wrong position that I see a lot right now, which is kind of exemplified by the term cycle of violence.
Okay.
Which just kind of justifies what they've done, Hamas has done, and makes it sound like, oh, Hamas did this terror attack, and then before that, it's a cycle of violence. So Israel clearly did something to Hamas. Mm-hmm. And then back and forth, and then it's just, oh, it's so complicated. There's so much history. Yeah. It's hard to say. There's two sides here, There's not. There's not two sides here. The true history of the situation is that Israel has, at every opportunity, extended the hand of peace, and Hamas and Gaza and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad has, at every opportunity, spat on the hand of peace.
Yep. Slight devil's advocate. This is obviously a ancient struggle between the two sons of Abraham.
Right. Right. Isaac and
Ishmael. And so there's been squabbling forever and ever. But it really doesn't justify genocide for anybody.
No, in fact, nothing justifies genocide.
Imagine that.
Yeah,
nothing.
Yes. That's one of those things when, they're doing a genocide, so they're wrong. That's all you need to think about that.
It should never be, okay, genocide, so let's do genocide to them, and then we'll do genocide to the other side.
Or, they're doing a genocide. Well, why are they doing that? What drove them to this? How did they arrive at the point where they thought that's never the right response to genocide.
Yeah, you just don't.
Right.
Don't do it.
Just say no to genocide.
Right.
Yeah, as I've been following this, I've just been struck, and this is kind of a tangent from the things we said we'd talk about, but I've been struck by, what happened in Nazi Germany could happen again. And this was an example of the kind of thing that happened in Nazi Germany every day.
Certainly.
It's the same scale too. Like if you're measuring, one day of this versus one day of the Nazi extermination of the Jews, it's about equal numbers.
Mm-hmm. If you were to compare the per capita numbers, it would be as though we lost 25,000.
I think, around there. I think it may be a little bit higher even.
Yeah.
Because there's only 9 million Israelis.
Right.
And they lost 1,300 people, and there's 300 million Americans, and we lost 2,900 on 9/11. So, but anyhow, what I've been struck by is just, wow, this really can happen again. And in fact, from watching Harvard and the Yale professor who tweeted out when someone asked what excuses the murder of babies, she said, "Oh, it's simple. Settlers are not civilians."
Good Lord.
This is a Yale professor. As far as I know, she's still employed. So these institutions are, as far as I'm concerned, the enemy of the American people.
Yeah. Hate speech much for those who believe in that?
Right. What happened to microaggressions? I thought microaggressions were a problem, but apparently not at Harvard or Yale. Yeah, I've just been realizing, wow, there really are lots of people who are anti-Semites. And I don't mean that, they are mean or use mean terms to Jews, but I mean they want to genocide the Jews.
Yeah, or they are actively voicing their support of actions that result in the genocide.
Right. I just saw a video, I think this was from today, of a high school, I think, in San Francisco, with students racing through the corridors chanting, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Just to be clear, Israel does not and has not occupied Gaza for 17 years. They left Gaza. The Gazans said, "Hey, we want Hamas to be our rulers." And so they voted and elected Hamas. There was probably shenanigans there, but the result was Hamas came to power. And in all that time, those 17 years, there's been no Jews whatsoever in Gaza. So Palestine is already free as it can be. From the river to the sea, though, just in case that confuses you, that means all of Israel is gone. You can't have Palestine from the river to the sea and also have Israel, because the river is the Jordan River, I think, and then the sea is the Mediterranean, obviously. And those are the bounds, the eastern and western bounds of Israel.
Mm-hmm. And if I recall, I think Dennis Prager, he summed up this conflict from the perspective of the whole land situation, because that is often, too, an argument that is coming from the left, is like, this is an issue of stealing land. And, you mentioned settlers and colonialism and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The difference between the stances of the groups is one group, Israel, has always been willing to acquiesce land, sell land, make a deal.
Time and again, they've handed over land.
Yeah. And it's never enough.
No.
And then the other side, the Palestinian, Gaza, whatever, side has always been, we just want to kill you and take your land.
That's exactly right.
Because it's ours.
People will tell you this issue is complicated, but it's not. One side says, hey, let's live in peace. You can have your land and I'll have mine, and we'll stay out of your land and you'll stay out of ours. And that's great. And we can even be friends and trade if you want. The other side says, you exist. How dare you exist? I want to kill you. That's the conflict here.
All there really is to say about it.
So when you have Yale and Harvard and CNN and AP and Reuters all pretending that there's some moral equivalence here, that this is some complex issue, I think that's evil. Because there is clear evil on one side here, and that evil is Hamas. And anything you're doing that's giving them even a little bit of cover, to me, that's aiding and abetting evil. So just one other term that you may have heard that is just misleading is the term open-air prison.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is just another example where the left and the media tries to confuse you. They use this term, Gaza is an open-air prison. To some degree, that's true. Gaza residents are not free to leave Gaza. They can't leave into Israel because when Israel lets Gazans into Israel, Jews die. So they can't let them in there. Gaza has another border with Egypt. And Egypt says, ain't no way you're coming across the border to us because believe it or not, a nation that doesn't have a secure border is not a nation. And Egypt knows that.
Joe Biden?
Yeah. But Egypt and Jordan and Syria and all these countries will say, we stand with Palestine. But then when anyone asks them to take Palestinian refugees, they say, absolutely not. Because I'm sure there's many reasons, but one of them is these guys are troublemakers. We can't keep Hamas out if we let Palestinians in, and Hamas causes trouble. We don't want that. So they say no. The other thing is, it's not an open-air prison because humanitarian aid is sent to Gaza all the time. All the time. There's an absurd amount of humanitarian aid going to Gaza. When it arrives, it is given to the Palestinian Gaza government, Hamas, and then Hamas takes water pipes and reuses them as rocket launchers, rocket tubes to launch rockets out of. They're not bazookas. But they will use everything and anything they can. When cement is delivered, they make terror tunnels. They don't care about the people of Gaza. They don't care about building infrastructure. They care about killing Jews. So every time money or resources is sent there, those money and resources are used to kill Jews. And Joe Biden just visited Israel, and when he was there, he said, I'm going to approve $100 million more in humanitarian aid to Gaza.
The dude doesn't get it.
Just the idea that you can give the money to Gaza is misleading because there's no one to give it to that's not Hamas.
Yeah. It's just going to be taken and misused. And, well, that's why, that's for the same reason it was a great idea to leave all of our equipment in Afghanistan.
Right. And
I wonder who's using that right now.
Yeah, I wonder if some of that made its way to Gaza.
Wouldn't be surprised.
The other thing we haven't talked about at all, and this is just kind of a holistic explanation of the situation, is Iran.
Yes.
So just so you know, Hamas is a terrorist group funded by primarily Iran. Hezbollah is another terrorist group on the north side of Israel in Lebanon, also funded by Iran. Iran's goal here, and they are not quiet about this, this is not something they keep secret, their goal is to surround Israel with enemies until they can destroy Israel.
That's just the goal.
All right, so we've covered most of our points, I think. We explained why the view is wrong. We have explained what I think the truth is. And the truth is that one group wants to live in peace and one group wants to kill the other group.
Yes.
Oh, another thing about the pop culture is immediately you have people like AOC and Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. The squad, the Hamas caucus, as they're now being called, which I think is a great term.
That is appropriate.
It is. But immediately, like maybe the day after, they were calling for a ceasefire. Israel hadn't responded yet. So what they were calling for was for Israel to just eat the attack and just be like, yep, 1,300 of our people were killed, hundreds were taken hostage, and we're just not going to respond, I guess, if I listen to AOC.
Yeah, is that what you would do? If that was your
Is that
family?
what any reasonable person should do?
No.
Of course it's not. It's just ridiculous to call for a ceasefire when
you are in the throes of defending yourself.
Right. A ceasefire implies there's two groups here who want peace. There are not.
There's one group who wants peace, and that's Israel.
Right. Hamas will take peace if it means they can avoid getting destroyed.
Yeah.
But that's the only reason.
That's live to fight another day.
Right. It's the playground bully who hits you and then says, okay, quits, we're done, no more fighting. As soon as they've hit you, then everything's done. But, until they hit you, no, we're not having peace. I want to punch you. And then they punch you. Oh, peace, we're done. I'm sure everyone's experienced that on the playground. I know I have.
Yep.
So what is the right reaction here?
First of all, take a look around you and see what the people that you know are saying, because if you had any question about where people stand,
this should make it clear.
This will probably make it clear, and be gracious to those who may be confused.
Right.
Maybe help them.
Saying I told you so is not helpful. It might feel good, but it's not helpful.
Yeah. Be very conscious of the mainstream media. We are obviously in an era where fact checkers can say, be quiet, you're lying. But then the mainstream media is not getting fact checked for something that has literally caused riots throughout all of the Middle East and embassies to be attacked And
right, them promoting this Hamas hospital lie,
correct,
has in fact inflamed the situation and made it more likely that these other nations will attack Israel.
Yeah. And just wholesale listening to terrorists before they're listening to basically one of our greatest allies.
Right, and easily the most humanitarian nation in the Middle East.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
There's only one nation in the Middle East where Jews and Muslims and Christians live side by side peacefully, and that's Israel. It's the only place that happens in the Middle East.
Yeah. So I think the only reaction here is don't side with the people whose position is kill the other people because we don't like them.
Yeah. Stand with the people who are defending their homes from literal terrorists.
Yeah.
How about that? The hashtag Israel's trying to get to trend is Hamas is ISIS.
Yeah.
And in the sense of how we understood ISIS, that's true.
Yeah.
You know,
maybe not literally the same group,
right?
but they're the same
they
ideas.
Coexisted, but
it's the same idea.
They wanted the same thing, which is the West destroyed and the Jews dead.
Mm-hmm.
So reject terror. just any group that says terror is okay sometimes, say, aha, I now know that you are not a good person. You are the opponent. You are the enemy. And do support Israel. I think there's all sorts of good reasons to support Israel. We've outlined many of them. They're humanitarian. People of different religions can live side by side in peace. For me, there's another reason. I'm a Christian. I believe the Bible. The Bible says that Israel is God's chosen people, and that the land God gave them is this land. It's the land they've lived in for 3,500 years or more.
Yeah. Off and on, based on them being genocided.
Right.
multiple times.
Right. The Romans, after the Romans conquered Israel in 70 AD, they then dispersed the Jews, tried to get them out because they always caused trouble. And then Rome came up with a brilliant idea. Rename the land. Do you know what Rome, the colonizers, renamed that land? Palestine. That's where that term comes from. It comes from oppressive colonizers. So
just go far enough back in history. You'll find the origins of this stuff.
Yeah. So support Israel. Do not support Hamas. When you hear a politician or a news anchor saying we should send humanitarian aid to Gaza, know that means money is being put into the hands of terrorists. No one wants innocents in Gaza to be hurt.
No.
Well, Hamas does. No one in America wants innocents in Gaza to be hurt.
Right.
The people in Gaza might disagree.
Yeah.
But Israel has to defend itself, and these enemies literally hide behind civilians. So it's going to get ugly. There's just no way around that. But Israel cannot keep allowing this to happen. Their hands are tied. They have to respond to this. So when people try to tell you, oh, there's two sides to this, or, oh, Israel's so terrible for invading Gaza, which I think they might be doing today. I think I saw that's about to happen.
Mm-hmm. I knew it was going to be soon anyway.
Right. If you hear anyone saying any of those things, you know better. Yeah. The response is Israel has to defend itself. It has every right and duty to defend itself, and that's what it's doing.
By the way, today may be a week from when you hear this.
Yes. Yeah. I did say the date earlier on.
Okay.
So, yeah. All right. I guess anything else important to say here?
We have demonstrated how this is relevant to pop culture, specifically having to do with the messaging and kind of the entities, which are, in my opinion, artifacts of pop culture that are driving these, and the reactions from those entities being the mainstream media and from higher education, which have been infiltrated by Marxist ideology.
Yep.
And then really just you can't have moral equivalency when it comes to evil.
I think
evil is evil.
Right. To hammer that home one last time, I said it earlier, but there's literally a woman who survived the Nazis. She is a Holocaust survivor. She then went to live in Israel, and now she was kidnapped, and as far as we know, she's still alive being held hostage by Hamas. It's happening again to her, this woman who survived the Nazis, which pretty much everyone agrees the most evil group that's ever existed. She survived that, and now she's in the hands of a group that's just like them. Except there's a difference. The Nazis tried to cover up what they did when they started losing the war. They started burning documents, burning evidence. Hamas, as they were doing this, were live streaming it online. They were celebrating it. They were cheering it. They're proud of this.
Despicable. Disgusting.
All right. Well, this has been the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast for today. We're brought to you by the Patriot Post, which is the oldest news digest on the web. It's right. It's free. Be sure to like and subscribe.
See you guys.